Hello and welcome to Talking Tudors, a fortnightly podcast about the ever-fascinating Tudor dynasty. My name is Natalie Grueninger and I'll be your host and guide on this journey through 16th century England. Are you ready to step through the veil of time into the dazzling and dangerous world of the Tudor court? Without further ado, it's time to talk Tudors. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Talking Tudors. I'm your host, Natalie Grueninger. Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce you to a new online event that I'm co-presenting with Dr. Owen Emerson in March 2025. It's called The Making of a Queen, Anne Boleyn 1501 to 1522. Through a series of 6 pre-recorded lectures and 1 live Zoom discussion, we'll explore the transformative experiences and interactions that shaped the woman and Queen Anne would become. Participants will also be entered into a very special giveaway and have access to all recordings for 2 months after the event ends. This would make the perfect Christmas gift for a Boleyn or Tudor history lover, and I do hope you'll consider joining us. For details, head to my website on thetudortrail.com or just Google The Making of a Queen Eventbrite. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the generous listeners who continue to support Talking Tudors on Patreon and extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone who's taken the time to rate and review the show. As an independent podcaster, this means a lot to me. If you love the podcast, please consider joining the Talking Tudors Patreon community. Visit patreon.com/talkingtudors for more information. Once you sign up, you'll have access to exclusive posts, additional monthly live talks, a member-only book club, patron-only monthly giveaways, to name just a few of the rewards. You can also support the podcast and share your love of Tudor history with the world by buying Talking Tudors merchandise. Check out all the products at talkingtudors.threadless.com. Now, on to today's episode. I'm thrilled to welcome Jackson van Uden to the show to talk about Peterborough Cathedral's Katherine of Aragon festival. Jackson is a young historian in the early stages of his career. He was recently named in the 2024 cohort of BBC History Extra's 30 Under 30 historians and has written several works on the tyranny of history's leaders. Jackson is the talks curator for the Katherine of Aragon festival in Peterborough, which commemorates the life of Katherine of Aragon. Let's dive straight into our conversation. Welcome to Talking Tudors, Jackson. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me. How have you been today?
Yeah, really well. Early morning for me, so started my day. So always love starting the day by talking Tudors, my favorite thing to do. So maybe you could just introduce yourself to our listeners and just tell us all a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, of course. So, hi guys, I'm Jackson van Uden, a historian based in Peterborough, England. But apart from being a historian of dictatorships, I'm also one of the festival organisers and talks curators of the Katherine of Aragon festival held at Peterborough Cathedral and Peterborough Museum in January. So I love the Tudors and everything about the period, really, and having grown up in one of the most important areas. So, yeah, thank you very much for giving that opportunity, Natalie.
Yeah, and so we are here to talk about this wonderful festival that you've obviously helped to organise, and it's about Katherine of Aragon, which I love. So when did you first become interested in her story in particular, and what do you think makes her such a fascinating subject?
Yeah, no, so I've lived in Peterborough most of my life. I've lived in the city since I was 6. So for me, Katherine is someone I've grown up being around, being surrounded by, and having been a student in a local school who went to the cathedral to experience the Katherine of Aragon festivals as a young boy. That Tudor period was fascinating for me, and my interest in power and dictators as a historian initially stemmed from Henry VIII. So my first Horrible Histories book was a history of England, and the king who stood out for me the most was Henry, and then later the Queen Elizabeth I. So I kind of began my journey from that point. But in the back of my mind, as I learned more about Henry's tyranny and just how horrible he was to people, there was always this point about Catherine of Aragon. I've grown up with her. People in Peterborough refer to her as Catherine because she's so close to us. That it was always something I wanted to learn more about, but always something that I wanted to kind of help out with. So when I was asked to get involved with the festival, I thought, well, this is something that basically my whole life has pointed me towards. So it's been a nice full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a nice way to honor her memory as well, especially that you've lived there all your life. That's quite incredible. So we've said, there's this amazing festival that's put on every year. When did that actually begin? And what's the aim of the week-long events that they put on?
So look, it's a bit difficult with the beginning of the festival. There's been commemoration of Catherine's life for nearly 400 years. So on that point, we can claim possibly that we're one of the longest serving history festivals. But I went nearly 20 years ago now, and the festival was going for ages since then. And my drama teacher at school, she had been going for another 20 years beforehand. So it's been going on for such an incredibly long amount of time. But it's something that I think a lot of us take for granted in Peterborough because it is just such a regular event for us. But this year we've tried to go bigger and better to try and commemorate Catherine in the best possible way that we can. So we still have some of the Tudor tours in the cathedral and the museum, so that people can be at court with the Tudors, they can be at home with the Tudors. But we've also added more events so that people have more ways to engage with history in Peterborough. So we have the Tudor Talks, which is bringing some of my favourite and some of your guys' favourite historians to Peterborough to talk about their work. And then we also have a banquet in the nave of the cathedral, which is going to be absolutely amazing. A Tudor banquet. Who else couldn't resist eating food in the middle of the cathedral? I mean, I can't think of anything better, to be honest.
Yeah, I must say, I had a peek at the events and it just looks absolutely amazing. I have to get there one year. And I think we should just mention, Jackson, because I don't know if we've mentioned it, that of course Catherine is buried at Peterborough Cathedral.
Yes. Yeah. See, I take that for granted, really.
Yeah, just in case our listeners, weren't aware, that is where Catherine was buried, at the cathedral, and you can still go and pay your respects. It's such a moving experience, I have to say. I have been lucky enough to have done that a couple of times, and I always find it very powerful, very moving. So please, if you're in the area or you're nearby, I highly recommend doing that. Before we talk a little bit more about the schedule of events that looks incredible, can you tell us a little bit about what Peterborough was actually like in the 16th century?
Yeah, so, Peterborough hasn't always been a city, and it's not always been the main place in the East Midlands. We tend to today think about it as one of the most important cities because it's on the main line, it's on the A1, it was one of Thatcher's new cities. But in the medieval period, Stamford, which is further up the road, was one of the more important towns. It had been a burh during the Anglo-Saxon period. You also have Colley Weston down the road where Margaret Beaufort's palace was. You also have Fotheringhay further down the road where the York family had their castle. So Peterborough is at this apex of so many different competing territories. And some of the iconography from Margaret Beaufort can be seen across the cathedral. You see the portcullis turning up across different gates and in the new palace. But Peterborough in the Tudor period was largely controlled by the abbots of the abbey because this was not a cathedral at that point. It was a monastery. And the abbots were incredibly powerful in Peterborough. They were responsible for having moved the town westward from its original location behind it. And they also had one of the most important chronicles, the Peterborough Chronicle, which dictated what had been happening in England across those few hundred years since Norman conquest. So it was a very weird town being marred or being ruled by that abbot. But it was also one of the richest monasteries in the area. They've got relics for Thomas Becket. They've got St. Oswald's arm in St. Oswald's Chapel. So it's a very rich monastery, but it is controlled by, the city is controlled by the monastery, by the abbot. And John Kirkton as well was one of those key people in showing that power. It was also a key route for monarchs going north. So you have several Plantagenet monarchs stop at Peterborough, the King's Palace, which unfortunately is not there anymore, on their way up to Scotland. So it was an important town because it was at the apex of all these different competing powers and competing locations. But you also have that incredibly powerful abbot who becomes a bishop in 1541 after the Reformation.
So let's go back and talk a little bit more about the events taking place next year. So this is happening in January, I believe. So you mentioned, you touched on a few there, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more about them and what aspects of Catherine's story in particular those events will be highlighting.
Yeah, so I think something that's really important to Catherine in her life was her faith and also learning, but also her recreational activities of sewing. So across the week, and I think it's important to note, this isn't just a history festival, it's a religious festival. So we have lots of religious events here to pay respect and commemorate Catherine. So we have a commemoration on the day that she was buried. We also have religious services, but we also have Catholic religious services because Catherine was a very staunch Catholic and that was a very important part of her life. So we make sure that that is being represented in our program of events. Now, learning, something that's important there, and it was important for her children to learn, particularly Mary. So we make sure we have schools days as well, where children come to the cathedral so they can learn more about the Tudor period. They go on Tudor history tours at the cathedral with old Scarlett, who was an old grave digger from the cathedral. So we make sure that the children are learning at the same time. Now, that talks program that we have at the weekend is looking at a vast array of bits of history that related to Catherine and related to the Tudor period. So we have Nathan talking about Elizabeth and Henry VII, their marriage, which makes the Tudors, which is important because it leads us to Catherine. We also have Nicola Tallis talking about Margaret Beaufort, which again is important because it leads to Henry. The Beaufort family are incredibly powerful in the area. We also have Peter Stifel talking about Mary I and some of her imagery relating to Catherine. So again, tying in with what Catherine's all about. And then we have Nicky Clark talking about ladies in waiting, particularly Catherine's, because, Catherine was as queen for longer than the other wives of Henry put together. So the way that she acts as a queen set that tone for the rest of Henry's reign. So being able to talk about how her ladies in waiting were acting gives us a bigger picture of the rest of the Tudor period. Elizabeth Norton will be also talking about Mary and Catherine, giving us that greater picture, context of the era. And then I will be talking about Katherine of Aragon, the tyranny of Henry VIII, relating to some of my work into tyranny, dictators and power, but looking at it through the lens of Catherine, because Catherine witnessed a lot of this tyranny over, a lot of her life, to be honest. And, it affected her personally as well. So I want to look at, how did she see that? But also, what was Henry doing that was so tyrannical? Because we often just say Henry was a tyrant, and then we pull a couple of examples. Beheaded a lot of people. He wasn't very nice to a lot of people. But when we look at it through the prism of someone, you can actually see that cruelty. So that's something we really wanted to make sure we're doing as well. And we have at home with the Tudors, at court with the Tudors, so people can interact with what that life was like as well.
Wow, it sounds absolutely amazing. What a program. And I have to say, all those speakers you just mentioned, I've been lucky enough to chat to myself, and some of them are really good friends. So I fully support all those speakers you have presenting there, Jackson. I love it. And I was really interested to hear you talk about the fact that you're obviously encouraging families and children to take part, because in my former life, I was a primary school teacher. And so this is really important to me, engaging children in the study of history and getting them excited. And I can't think of a better way really than to have them there at the cathedral or at the museum, engaging with actual artifacts and the stories. So tell us a little bit more about how families can take part in this week-long event.
Yeah, so, Alex, who's in charge of our education team at the cathedral, she is also a former teacher. I currently teach as well. So it's really important for us to make sure that kids can learn about, our shared national heritage and learn about what some of their lives were like and what the court was like as well. So we make sure that those events are on the weekend so families can go down and learn about that life and interact with those people. The reenactors that we have at the cathedral are absolutely fantastic. They stay in character for the whole day, which must be incredibly difficult. I couldn't do that for a whole day. So they're absolutely brilliant, and it really brings it to life for the children. Last year I saw a couple of kids, and they ran up to Catherine, and they were just so happy to see her and think, actually, this is really having an impact on these children. 20 years ago, when I went and saw these people dressed as Henry, as Catherine, it was a fantastic experience, and it's led to me being involved now as an adult. Hopefully those experiences that we give to the children on the weekend has that same effect as well, where, in 20 years' time, I might be passing the baton onto someone else who went when they were a child. And those school sessions as well, we also teach them about the cathedral, teach them about some of the events in the museum, because it's important for classes and schools to be able to experience this as well. It's part of that cultural capital where, sadly, Peterborough's not a very well-off city. And to give these experiences to children who might not necessarily have had these experiences or the opportunity to go and experience these things, they can have the opportunity. They can learn about this history in the place that the history happened. It's not a textbook. It's not some documentary series on the classroom, whiteboard. It's something that's very tangible. And I think that tangible aspect in education is important for some people, because they start to realize the importance when it's not in a book. And I think that's what we're trying really hard to bring out for these kids.
Yeah, I think that's so important. So much more engaging, isn't it, when you have obviously something to look at that's not, just a written paragraph in a textbook or something. And you're so right. That is something that I think they'll remember for a long time. It is very moving when you see someone in costume. It brings the history to life, definitely. So I think that's a really great aspect of the festival as well. Now, in terms of people that are not in Peterborough, is there any way that people that might be overseas or in other parts of the country can actually engage with the festival? Is there an online element at all?
So people will be able to watch that commemoration, Catherine, on the day that she was buried, the 29th, online. We thought that was an important thing for people to do, because last year, part of the festival, people were dialing in from across the world to try and pay their respects, commemorate Catherine, and we wanted to do that in the best way possible. I stood at Catherine's team last year filming a video, and someone came up from Brighton, on the Thames Link train, which, people from the UK who are listening, it's not a very nice train, everyone knows that, and they've come up all the way from Brighton to Peterborough to pay their respects to Catherine. They've come, laid a pomegranate, had a little chat, and they've gone home. And we know that people from across the world want to do the same. So that's why we've gone for that online element, to try and pay our respects and allow other people to pay their respects in the way that they can from such distance. Because we know Catherine is important for a lot of people. For some people, she's the entryway into the Tudor world. If you've learned about her from Philippa Gregory, from Alison Weir, she often is the first queen that occurs in a writing. So she is often that first access point to that type of history. So we want to make sure that part is accessible for everyone.
Yeah, she has a global audience. There's no doubt about that. So that's really great that people can join in. And I'm assuming they can find information on the website. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. It's all on the website. I won't read it out because it's complex.
That's okay. I'll add the link to the show notes to make it nice and easy for everyone. And so what are the events that you're most looking forward to personally, and why?
Oh, so for me personally, I'll go for the main one because I'm the talks curator. I'm really looking forward to the talks. I'm friends with a lot of these historians. To be able to actually see them in my hometown and hang out with them in my hometown, it's going to be a pretty cool experience. But to also see them talk in a place where I love, in a place I want to bring history to, is something I'm really looking forward to. And I'm really proud of all the work that we've done as a team to make sure that can happen. And then the second point is, I'm a big 6'2" sports player. I'm looking for the banquet. I love food. It's important to me. So I'm really looking forward to sitting down for that Tudor meal, getting my hands on some meat, some breads, whatever else is on the table. I can't remember the menu. So I'm really excited for that one.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. It's always special, I think, when you're in a setting like that, and that is a unique setting to be dining in. So that is going to be amazing, I think.
And there's, I think it precedes or was around the same time as the event called Sonnet Lumiere. So being in the cathedral with candle lights and being able to experience that gorgeous building in that kind of setting, you can't beat it. It is the best cathedral in the UK, and I'll say that with a full chest.
Oh, that does sound really atmospheric. I have to say, I attended, I think it was the Berlin Festival many, many, many moons ago at Blickling Hall. And there was a service at Norwich Cathedral. I think it was Norwich Cathedral. And they had music, and Alison Weir gave a talk. And it was so incredibly moving to have candlelight and to be sitting in a place where people for, centuries have worshipped. It was incredibly powerful. So I can imagine that is going to be just as powerful as that moment that I experienced.
And I can't believe you had that experience as well. I'm really quite jealous now. That sounds absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it was. And I have to do more of that. It's when I come over to the UK, my schedule's usually so busy that I need to make more time to go to these cathedrals and listen to some of the services, because it's incredible. It's very moving. So Jackson, what are you hoping that people take away from this experience?
For me, I think, recent scholarship over Catherine has increased, but she's not as well studied as the other five queens. And, something I really want people to take away from this is that Catherine was an incredibly important queen, and possibly undervalued as well. She set that tone for what Henry expected from queenship for the rest of his reign, and perhaps what his children expected for the rest of their reign. So, I want people to come away from this with a deeper understanding, a deeper respect for Catherine, for, what she did, what she went through, but also her role in Tudor history, because she was so, so important. She had two husbands. Henry's her second. That's, everything that she went through with Arthur was probably deeply traumatic. Everything that she went through with Henry, probably even more traumatic as well. So, I want people to come away from this with a deeper respect and a deeper understanding of Catherine and her life.
Absolutely. I always want to see more on Catherine's early life as well. I think that is an area that is understudied. And I hope, fingers crossed, that we'll see more studies soon coming out on these aspects of Catherine's life.
Me too.
And certainly festivals like this one, I think, bring great appreciation. And it's something so lovely for the people of Peterborough, as you've said, to be able to feel that pride in the fact that they have, this incredible Tudor queen buried there in their cathedral. I think that's incredibly special. So as I've said, I will add the website link so that everyone can have a look. And of course, if you're in the area, I would highly recommend you attend and join in. There's so many things that they can do by the sounds of it, Jackson. So, talks or the fun Tudor court stuff or the things with kids. So definitely get involved if you can. But I can't let you go just yet, because I have one more thing that I like to do with guests when they're first on the podcast, and that's what I call 10 to go. So these are just 10 quick questions just to get to know you a little bit better. First one, what was the last book that you read, or one that you're currently reading?
Last book I read was actually Alison Weir, Henry VIII, King and Court. I'm due to interview Alison next week. So I've just finished reading that one, making sure I'm fully prepared for that.
Yeah, lovely. And so what about, and maybe let's take Peterborough out of the equation for this one. What's another historic site that you really enjoy visiting?
Oh, you've got me there. I actually, I went to Harvington Hall earlier this year. I really, really enjoyed Harvington Hall. I loved getting in and about the priest hides. I got stuck getting into one. So yeah, I'm going to have to say Harvington Hall.
Wonderful. And what about the last film or series that you watched? And it doesn't have to be anything historical.
I actually finished a couple of weeks ago watching James Holland and Al Murray's Walking the Ground, World War II Walking the Ground. It's absolutely fantastic. It's like the Top Gear of history. So yeah, that was the last thing I watched.
That sounds good. And what about a new skill that you would like to learn?
Video editing. Not on my phone. I do most of my editing on TikTok and whatever. So I'd like to get better at Adobe Premiere.
Yeah. I think I'm with you on that one. That's on my list. It's been on my list for a long time. What about a travel destination that you would like to visit?
I would love to go to the south of France and kind of track everything part of the Albigensian Crusade. It's one of my favourite periods of history, so that's what I'd really like to do.
What about a favourite author? And again, doesn't need to be a history author.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure you have this because we're podcasters. All we read is history.
Yeah.
So it's Frank de Cotter. I love all his work on Mao and dictators. So yeah, he's certainly a big hero of mine.
Awesome. And what do you do to find inspiration for your work? If you're not feeling very creative on a particular day, what gets you in the mood?
I go to the gym. I go to gym every night, same time with my mates, make sure I go to sauna, make sure I relax, switch off. Usually the next day, I kind of get there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so interesting how it often is about physical. When I ask that question, people often say either a long walk, and I know for me, it is definitely a long walk, getting out in nature or going to the gym. Something physical, I think, just gets you out of your thoughts, doesn't it? And you're just in the moment.
Take your mind off it.
What about, last question for you, a great piece of advice that you've either been told or that you've read, can be related to anything really?
Yeah. So it's from my mum, actually. It's from my mum. My mum was just ask. Just ask. And I think the audacity of asking got me into a lot of places where, perhaps wouldn't have ordinarily been allowed to go, got me opportunities and experiences I probably ordinarily wouldn't have. So yeah, just ask.
Yeah, I love that. And it's not always an easy thing to do. So I think your mum's a very wise woman, and I'm going to keep that one in mind as well. So thank you. And then the very final thing is the Tudor takeaway. So I like to ask my guests for a takeaway, something for our listeners to go off and explore after the episodes. Do you have a takeaway for us?
Yeah. So one thing for me, I think it's got to be about Catherine. And my Tudor takeaway is the differing accounts on what happened on the day that Catherine was buried. Some people say that Henry was very respectful, very mournful, officially mourning Catherine. And other accounts, pro-Anne accounts, pro-Catherine accounts, say that Henry and Anne were actually rather disrespectful to Catherine. Some take that yellow colour as a colour of mourning from Spain, and others take it as a colour of joy for Elizabeth's birth. So that's my Tudor takeaway.
Yeah, I love it. And, just to add a shameless plug, I do weigh in on that argument in my book, The Final Year of Anne Boleyn Jackson. So if you want to take a look. But thank you so much for joining me on the podcast and talking about this wonderful festival. I can't wait to hear all about it as it's happening, and I'll tune into that online event as well. So thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Talking Tudors. Thank you so much for joining us. I absolutely love to hear from listeners, so if you have any comments or suggestions, or just want to say hi, please get in touch with me via my website, www.onthetudortrail.com, where you'll also find show notes for today's episode. If you've enjoyed the show, please share the podcast with friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. I also invite you to join our Talking Tudors podcast group on Facebook, where you can interact with other Tudor history lovers and hear all the behind-the-scenes news. You'll also find me on Twitter. My handle is On The Tudor Trail, and on Instagram as The Most Happy 78. It's time now for us to re-enter the modern world. As always, I look forward to talking Tudors with you again very soon.